Sean Kidney, last session of a 5-day conference. This is tough. The conversation has been rich. Now we want to have a bit of a roundup. I've got a few speakers to join me, but first, let's just do the important part, which is to thank our sponsors. First, our global sponsor, JP Morgan, made a real difference in making this happen. Our other sponsors are also incredibly important. From Citi, and have a look at Val Smith's interview on the day one of this conference. The recording is available if you're registered. Moody's, Luxembourg Green Exchange, Ping An Asset Management of China, Credit Suisse, Refinitiv, BNP Paribas, IHS Markit, Allianz Bernstein, FSD Africa, and the others. And thank you, Mizuho, for the Japanese translation that is available today, which takes me to housekeeping. Japanese translation is available today. If you click the headphone button, and you'll get other languages, Spanish, Mandarin, French, and Portuguese as well. Use the Q&A button if you want questions, and network, folks. Network, make contacts. We will answer, our team will answer questions in the networking pages, but you can also meet others. Today, to finish off this session, we've brought a few friends. First, Lydia Harvey, who's a senior ESG specialist or analyst at JP Morgan Global Index Research Group, and someone who I'm going to claim some little credit here. When she first was in London, she worked with us for a while at Club Bonds Initiative, and she was very, very good. JP Morgan's very lucky to have her. I'm going to say we're lucky to have her join us today with this last commentary. Then Bertrand Millot, who's the Vice President of Risk Management and Fixed Income, and also the Head of Climate Risk and Issues at Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec, or CDPQ, which is the Quebecois public sector pension fund. And what you might not know is also a big investor in emerging markets. I've got to know Anita George, who runs the Indian side of CDPQ, who's making huge investments in India, so they're everywhere. And then, of course, Kris Atkinson from Fidelity, which is the elephant of the block in terms of fund managers. He's a portfolio manager of global corporate bonds, sustainable reduced carbon bonds, global hybrids portfolio, co-manager of the Fidelity Money Builder, income and short, and I don't know, like corporate bond strategy. Kris, you seem to have one of the longest titles I've seen in modern history. So, but he's also a champion of transition. So, thank you for joining me. We've had a full day, as you would know. Just to recap briefly, we had Nathan Fabian from the Principles for Responsible Investment. He's the Chief Responsible Investment Officer there, and also Chair of the EU Platform, talking initially of our Anna Creed about platform and about investors and transitions, a discussion methodologies, Martin Spalk for the European Commission, a discussion on hydrogen that got my blood going, I can tell you, in terms of the opportunities in the hydrogen industry and all the related industries, like fertilisers, for example, because Alexander Klein, the International Fertiliser Association, was there. Chat with Nigel Topping, UN COP Ambassador, a really good session on buildings, agriculture, transport, shipping, and then just a session on entities, which is assessments of corporate strategies and corporate capex plans. And then, and of course, a talk by Chris Hohen from the Children's Investment Fund. We have a day-long conversation on transition. Now, I want to start with you, if I can, Kris. You've been talking up this issue of the importance of transition going forward. I guess what I'm interested in is what you see the implications of the conversation we've had today, what this topic means for portfolio managers, and for the folks that are out there that are trying to grapple with this issue, what should they know? What do they need to understand about this particular topic from an investor perspective? Kick us off.
Thank you, Sean. Well, there's an awful lot to cover there, isn't there? I mean, I think, firstly, congratulations on a fantastic conference. 5 days is pretty impressive to fill with climate finance, and in particular to yourself, and you chaired most of the sessions, so that's a pretty impressive stamina there. I think what I would draw from today's conversations, firstly is optimism, right? So after we all sort of take the same ESG feeds, climate feeds, and sort of daily doom and gloom, if you like. But there's absolutely a case for hope and optimism. Firstly, and most importantly, obviously, the participants in this conference are the stewards of trillions of dollars of capital. And to misquote, I think it was Everett Dirksen, a trillion here, trillion there. Soon we're talking about real money. So, what have I taken away, and what do I think is important for investors to know? I think the last session, and I think the first session of the day, highlighted the importance of how we finance transition with confidence. And of course, there are various institutions, CBI being one of them, TPI, CDP, so on and so forth, who are attempting to help investors in terms of establishing credibility with the corporates and the issuers in which we invest. And absolutely, this is to be applauded. And in particular, a lot of that work is free to use. I think what struck me in the first session of the day was that with all that plethora of tools, if I had been a retail investor parachuted into that conference, or just an investor with a relatively limited understanding of climate finance, it could be somewhat perplexing. A lot of acronyms being thrown around, and so I think it's important that we find a path through to standardize, sort of market practice, so that we can understand, what really is a genuine transition and what isn't. And then maybe the second point, and again I could talk at this at length, is just around that sort of process of transition being, well, it is a process, is the point really, from one state to another. And critically, and I think this was a point made in the report that you released today, or the white paper that you released today, and also you mentioned in the last session, it's that no industry or organization can be left behind in this transition. And that point came out really strongly, I thought, in the green hydrogen session today, and again in the transport and the building and ag session. Assets which may be considered dirty today may indeed or be critical to effect a speedy transition. So shunning them can be an impediment to change rather than an accelerant. And I think you put it nicely in the last session, taking the tough stuff and shifting it rather than washing your hands of that responsibility, which I think was the quote that Chuka Muna said earlier on in the week. So, I mean, those are the first 2 points. I mean, I've got pages and pages of notes from today. I can carry on for another hour, but I'll let somebody else have an opportunity to speak. So,
good start, Kris. Thanks so much. Bertrand, your reflections.
Well, we all know this is first, hi everybody. We all know it's a very, very important subject. Just a few words on CDPQ. We've been at this game now for almost 4 years. We announced climate policy in 2017, committed ourselves to increasing significantly our green investments. We achieved a 100% increase in 3 years, which represent about 10% of the fund today. We also set ourselves to decreasing the intensity of the portfolio by 2025, 25%. We achieved 38% at the end of last year, and have been a founding member of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. So we've been hard at it for quite a while. I would say that the question of transition, there is a sense that finance needs to do something, and that is absolutely critical. I think there is also a sense that there are investment opportunities, which is true. There is risks, also very true. There is a need to reconcile all that, and there is a need to better account for carbon. Kris alluded to it. To me, there is a dichotomy between the quantity of carbon that one has in a portfolio and the quality of that carbon. What is that carbon applied for? It's fine to finance green, but we shouldn't all forget that a wind turbine is based on cement foundation, has a pillar made of steel, it's full of copper and steel in the nacelle, and a horror, the blades and stuff are derived from oil. And so we need to all work on financing the greening of these materials, because otherwise, if we just cover the planet in wind turbines, we'll have missed half the picture. So it's a super important thing. And I think those points were made earlier today. I think there is a need to improve the tools at our disposal to measure, to quantify, to assess who is doing the right thing and who is telling stories. There is also a very important aspect, which is the need to start financing negative emissions to reduce the ones that are unavoidable. It's not an excuse to continue to emit, but there are some unavoidable emissions. And it's given the fact that we're late, humanity is late in the game in correcting our trajectory, we need to start thinking how to finance those negative emissions soon. Thank you.
No, it's a critical point. And we haven't in this conference spoken about direct air capture or the enormous potential in land use, reconfiguration and reforestation and so on. It is something we've got to move on. I'm sure in next year's conference we will have a focus around that, because we've got a growing focus, a growing movement around natural capital issues and how to finance those, which have been very challenging. But there's some work being done now. And when TFND, the Task Force on Natural Capital, comes through recommendations next year, hopefully that'll lay out an agenda that we can engage on one aspect of what I'm going to call sequestration, but the direct air capture and so many parts. That agenda is big, isn't it, Bertrand? At least, but it's very nascent. Lydia, from your perspective, including, by the way, you have to pick up this question of how do we reflect this stuff in indices? Very important.
Thank you, Sean. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. So I'm joining to represent the JP Morgan Global Index Research Fixed Income team. So, of course, I'm listening to all of the wonderful topics and discussions happening today from the lens of how do we apply this from an index perspective, exactly as you say, Sean. So there was a lot of really great information today that really drilled down into particular sectors and particular companies and topics like hydrogen and, the sectors that need to decarbonize rapidly and deeply. And the challenge that, I see in all of this from my perspective is how do we actually use these tools and the data that's available and do it at a scale across, a predominantly emerging markets focused index, coverage, which is what we do here in the index research team. So, our indices cover the entire investable fixed income emerging markets asset class. So we're talking corporates, sovereigns, private companies. The difficulty with getting the right data to kind of apply the transition across all of these different asset classes is very large. However, on the more positive side, with great power is that great responsibility as well. And so we do have this incredible opportunity here to look at the transition from an index perspective. And we have the power to actually direct capital and provide incentives for companies to transition. And we can do this at an incredible scale. And so, again, what I'm thinking is how can we use what we're learning today to actually address that, and what sorts of things can we take away? Some of the things I thought were really interesting today, one of the earlier sessions was actually one of your colleagues, Anna from the CBI. She said something really simple, but actually just really stuck with me, which is at the end of the day, when you're looking at different sectors and different companies, it's not about are you best in class anymore. A lot of ESG approaches are best in class style approaches. And certainly our ESG index suite is focused very much on best in class as well. But when it comes to energy transition, it's not about are you best in class? It's basically just as simple as are you improving and are you decarbonizing? And that's kind of ties in really nicely to something that Theory actually mentioned later on, which was a little bit controversial, which was let's just invest in areas that have a coal history. Let's invest in, utility generators that have had thermal coal. And it's kind of tying into the same thing. It's like, sometimes it makes sense to include these companies within the portfolio and look at the momentum and whether or not they're actually transitioning away from thermal coal onto greener sources over a particular time frame. And that's where we're going to see that rapid decarbonization. And that's how we as an index provider can incorporate things like the transition. And I guess the last thing I thought was really interesting was actually from Nigel Topping. And he said something that stuck with me, which was, of course, this is all about mitigation. Of course, it's all about rapidly transitioning and decarbonizing. But he actually said, maybe that's just a pathway to adaptation and resilience. And that's one of the things that we're also trying to think about as well. How can we include concepts of adaptation within whatever index products we come up with, so that we're not only looking at mitigation, but also trying to understand which countries in particular are at, the greatest risk of vulnerability. And, one last thing I'll mention on that is if you look at the recent German Watch Index, which looks at, the top countries that have suffered from extreme weather events in terms of tragically lives lost and also infrastructure damage. In 2018, for the very first time, Germany actually was in one of those top 10. It's typically kind of low-lying island states, but we're really starting to see large developed market countries featuring in the top 10 of this German Watch Index, and you don't want to be in the top 10. So, these are all the sorts of things that I was thinking about today when I was listening to this great agenda. So I'll stop there because, like Kris, I could just rabbit on for days.
And I guess that's something important to note. There's a lot to discuss and a lot to explore here, and we need to. Really, for the last 30 years, it feels like we've been listening to the scientists saying, what do we do? Or rather saying, we need to do something. And we've been just saying, well, so what have we got to do now? Say X, Y, and Z. And then we've been saying, oh, that looks really hard. What about we just do this? Will that be all right? And that's kind of why we're in the mess we're in now, because we haven't taken action. We've learned from the pandemic, I hope, cross fingers, that you need to listen to the scientists and act quickly. And it's exactly the same story with climate change scientists. We need to listen to them and act quickly. But Bertrand, it's not always simple, is it? And you've been working very hard with Caisse de dépôt, CDPQ management and others about how to make the changes. But we've had this conversation about applying methodologies, applying filters, looking for investments that would trigger rapid transition, not just a straightforward linear decarbonisation of the portfolio, and what that would look like and how that would fit with your existing tracking metrics, because you've been tracking your green investments for some time now. Can you tell us a little bit about that from what you're wrestling with as an investor?
Yes. CDPQ invests across all asset classes and across the world, as you indicated earlier. And so we do have the luxury of having in-house infrastructure teams, private equity teams, etc. And we get our hands dirty and we invest directly in things. We're on the board of companies. And so, doing in that context and using those teams, those tools, it is relatively easy to invest in green assets. And we were one of the early developers of green offshore wind turbines. We're also a large investor in renewables in the US. Those tools are not necessarily available to everybody because you need those teams. And if you look at what's available on the public market, it's not that accessible in that area. It's the same for green buildings, where our real estate subsidiary has been making strides building buildings, developing green things, insulating and installing solar panels and replacing boilers, et cetera, to reduce the carbon footprint. To echo what Lydia was saying, we've also been investing in thermal power. And using our influence with the company, but also with the regulator, to actually ensure that those dirty boilers are replaced by natural gas, are replaced by renewables. But I would stress the hard work that this requires with the company, with the regulator, with local government to make this happen. So it's really not just investors that can decide, oh, I'm going to do this, that, and the other. You need to ensure the company and everybody is aligned, and the government have a huge role to play in this. Because in the end, it is them who decide where the windmills are going and what is happening to the price of electricity or the asset base of the utility companies, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing. Where our focus is shifting, or we're getting increasing interest is how do we invest in dirty stuff that needs transition. The type of investments of sectors that I mentioned earlier in my example of the wind turbine, and that is really, really tricky because companies are barely there, slowly moving. Disclosures are insufficient. It's really difficult. I think we are helped by entities like SBTI and CBI, etc., trying to normalize or issue opinions on the quality of the efforts of companies, and normalize the thinking around this. But a lot more needs to be done so that when investors invest in something, they know what they're getting into, and they know what the company itself is doing to do the right thing, to reduce their emissions, to change their processes, to sell greener products. Super important.
It's a big agenda. Kris, I'm interested in your thoughts about this. I also want to pick up Lydia's comments about rapid decarbonisation and picking up, we've been hearing reports from one of the world's most carbon-intensive companies, Sasol in South Africa, who manufactures petrol and hydrogen from coal. Boy, there is nothing dirtier than that as far as I know. And yet the new CEO has been pushing a whole lot of green hydrogen initiatives. And we're expecting to get an announcement from them later this month about some of the issues in those areas. How would they cross your portfolio? I mean, in the fixed income space, they issue bonds, of course. I mean, what would your current thinking about assessing? How would you look? Where would you look now at the quality of their plan? Because in theory, if they're doing a rapid change, and the question is how rapid it is, it should be interesting, right? How do you manage that now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not altogether easy one either. The first point to make is that we're obviously fixed income investors, bond investors, and the portfolios that I manage are, primarily investment grade. It is not the job of bond investors to provide the first loss piece on a new piece of technology. Right? So we are there we're very happy to fund capex, but particularly in this low interest rate environment, our upside is basically capped at getting our capital back and a probably increasingly small coupon. So funding new technologies is incredibly risky, and I speak as somebody who's done that in the past with let's say mixed success, and it can be extremely painful. So the way that we tend to approach that is, as you alluded to, is to look at those large corporations that have transition stories. So they're looking to decarbonize an existing business. They're looking to whether it be cement or steel, or companies like Sasol, looking to reduce their emissions going forward, because they have an existing business which may indeed be a legacy fossil fuel intensive, carbon intensive business, which cash flows from that can be used to fund those new investments. So to put it bluntly, would I rather lend $500 million to a startup looking to develop green hydrogen, or would I rather give it to an industrial gases company or a BP or a Shell? As a bond investor, the latter two are going to be a much safer investment, and probably, if I'm being blunt, the probability of success from those very large organisations with huge engineering and financial capabilities is probably higher. But then that brings me sort of full circle to some of the other problems, and again, this sort of comes back to the question that you raised earlier and Bertrand's very well thought out answer around basically portfolio decarbonisation not equaling real life decarbonisation. So one of the things that sustainable investors are often challenged with is limits on carbon intensity on their portfolios for obvious reasons. Our clients want us to be able to demonstrate that we're doing something to decarbonise. But I don't have to put very many cement companies or steel companies, and in particular Sasol, into my portfolio for that to blow up my carbon budget. It just doesn't work. A 1% position in Lafarge Holcim probably increases my carbon footprint by about 20%. On a today basis. So we have to think about the unintended consequences of some of these limits and some of these restrictions that are placed on portfolios, because while it may help you to sleep at night because your portfolio is 50% lower in emissions than the benchmark, it has absolutely nothing to do with driving decarbonisation going forward. And that's really where I think our capital ought to be focused. And that's, I think, an area where the labelled sustainable bond market has probably thus far fallen behind. It's very good at financing utilities, very good at financing banks with green bonds, not so good at financing oil and gas companies who want to transition, not so good at financing steel and cement companies who want to transition. I don't know if that answers your question, but it certainly was a point I wanted to make.
Look, it's a key point, and I think one of the things implicit here is moving beyond equity engagement into the potential engagement of fixed income investors, which is one of the things that Larry Fink and BlackRock's been talking about going forward, and tools for that. But I guess that question of messing up the metrics, Bertrand, is what you and I have been talking about, which Kris raised, decarbonisation strategy. Sasol's an extreme case. It's only double B minus to be precise. So it might not make your portfolios for those reasons. The fixed income I'm talking about. But Bertrand, the principle is still the same, isn't it? So how are you thinking of tackling this question? You have companies that could be very high carbon if you bring them into your portfolio. It could be an Enbridge, it could be a Suncor, for example. But if they have a very aggressive decarbonisation strategy and you want to support them, how will you treat them? Would you actually invest in their fixed income, let alone any other kind of asset class, going forward? Because this is an essential issue in the transitions discussion, I think.
Yeah, it is, and it's. Thank you, Sean. It's a very, very hard question to answer. It is really an issue in the context of portfolio targets. Also, one thing that we've done internally is to link the variable compensation of everybody within the organization to achieving certain targets. And obviously, looking at these type of investments is an issue in that context because it is not quite aligned. So we've been thinking hard about this and are looking at ways to square the circle. We will make an announcement a bit later this month, so I can't really say much more. But it is something that investors need to start thinking about if we want to decarbonize this planet, is how to invest in the gray or the black to make it green, and find the companies that do this and are actually serious about doing it.
Lydia, are you getting customer inquiries about this now? Is this on the agenda, this kind of issue, or is it still abstract?
It's very firmly front and center of our agenda. So, we do have a range of ESG, fixed income, emerging markets focused indices. That is a mouthful. Anyway, we have a range of ESG indices, but they don't, they're kind of broad based, and they're supposed to consider, a kind of market standard for ESG approaches. But what we are getting more and more demand for is new index methodologies that are either decarbonizing, or they are aligned to a particular temperature goal, or they are indeed, if it's a corporate benchmark, actually aligned with the European Union benchmark regulation, which has come out recently, that has two new definitions of indices. So one is the climate transition benchmark and one is the Paris aligned benchmark. And both of these new definitions have pretty tough minimum technical standards that you need to abide by if you're going to release a new index and call it one of those terms. So certainly that's very much on our plate for the end of this year and next year. We're looking across both corporates and sovereigns. One of the challenges with doing it at a sovereign level is that so far, the benchmark regulation, which gives us a really handy roadmap and kind of puts everyone in the same page, doesn't actually apply to sovereigns. And so we're a little bit flying blind when it comes to coming up with a sovereign methodology. But certainly, the focus for us would be across all of those asset classes. And at least with the corporate side of things, we do have that pretty solid roadmap laid out for us from the EU benchmark regulation. There are a couple of indices out there in the market already. They're mainly equity focused. And so, we're really hoping to provide that for our clients on the fixed income side. Again, the challenges are going to be, how do we achieve these minimum technical standards for the climate transition benchmark when we're dealing with a universe that is emerging markets focused and often private companies as well? So it's great that there are companies out there with, science-based targets or Paris-aligned targets. And it's great that there's all these amazing data points, but the fundamental question remains, how do you use that if you're actually investing in private companies or you're investing in emerging markets companies that maybe don't have those sorts of targets? So we really need to rely on actually going back to the basics. How can we use some of the most basic data available to us, things like Scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions, for example, and how can we work with that to try and meet these minimum technical standards and make sure that this index we create will decarbonize year on year? So, I can list all the challenges, but I can't yet list all the solutions, but it's definitely something that we are spending all of our brain power on, to be quite honest, at the moment.
Well, Kris, I guess that's good news. They're going to roll out some products that will make it easier for us to do something in this particular area. I want to ask your thoughts on a couple of the other issues. The sovereigns question is interesting that Lydia raised. And obviously Fidelity is a big sovereign investor globally. And I can remember having a presentation to the Fidelity team earlier in this year, and your sovereign's fixed income portfolio manager was very excited about the prospect of further engagement. Have you gone that far down the tree? We've seen green bonds coming out of sovereigns, which is great. Are there further axes of engagement that you're considering at the moment beyond that, especially when there's because of the transitions of sovereigns?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, the sovereign issue is not an area that I have to worry too much about. The list of funds that you read off earlier are all corporate, so my focus is very much on the corporate side of things. Having said that, we are driving engagement with both sovereign issuers, and quasi sovereign issuers, across the world, but in particular in emerging markets, and that doesn't. We're not constrained there to issuers of green bonds. We have an approach. We have our own internal ESG rating approach, an engagement approach, which requires us to have those sort of in-depth conversations with issuers where we feel that they are falling behind, and obviously. In the area of climate, there's quite a long list of sovereigns who are falling behind. But in terms of the conversations that I have, they're more at the corporate level. So I can't give you too much insight into the results of those conversations, but it's certainly an area that we're pushing very heavily.
I guess the area I want to go to next is around engagement in corporates, which also is sovereigns. So there's this idea of transitions. So far, so good. We've got to do some mapping of what transitions looks like with the support of our colleagues at TPI, SBTI, RMI, and various other acronyms, as you pointed out earlier. But of course, when it comes down to achieving the transitions, the engagement story is very important. And I told the story earlier of a fund manager who'd divested Exxon and weren't able to vote in the Exxon resolution to get new directors up, and felt they'd missed out on an opportunity. They weren't sure that it was the right decision to divest it. They're not sure it would have been right to stay, by the way. That's still up in the air. But nevertheless, it raises an interesting question about engagement and about how we use that. Of course, the same in principle could apply in fixed income, as we talked about, and we've now seen more fixed income investors engaging. This could be an extension of the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance and the Climate Action 100+. I guess I'm interested in the appetite. So how far advanced are you from a fixed income perspective in thinking along this line? Can you see a situation where we might be going into the treasuries of a major corporate and saying, as fixed income investors, especially the larger ones, we all take a slice of them, we would like to see, what's your strategy? What's your transition strategy? Give us some details and granular detail. Is that level of engagement on the horizon?
It's not on the horizon. It's already here. The question that I often get asked is, well, you're just a fixed income investors. Why would a corporate listen to you? They're going to listen to their shareholders, so on and so forth. But actually, we find that corporates are very willing to engage with fixed income investors. Obviously, we have one advantage over shareholders that that they don't have, is that we're frequent providers of capital to these large corporations, whereas typically equity investors may provide capital directly on a handful of occasions over a long period of time. Whereas, particularly very large corporations will be coming back to the bond markets, at least annually, if not several times a year. So, that level of conversation happens every time, they step into our office, pick up the phone to us. We're asking them about the transition, and we have an engagement model of Fidelity, which is cross asset class. So it relies on collaboration between the fixed income team, the equity team, the sustainability team, to push management, and we do that. Obviously, we have the benefit of both sides of the equation there to help influence management. But there are plenty of examples where fixed income has initiated and led that engagement, and continues to do so. And there was a comment made earlier on around SLBs, sustainability-linked bonds, perhaps not being ambitious enough in terms of their climate objectives, and I can probably agree with that. However, what we have found is that they are a fantastic vehicle for engaging with companies. So, firstly, they have a contractual commitment to report their emissions, so that forces them to take it seriously. And then, of course, they have to disclose to us how they're going to achieve those emissions reductions. So they typically come with a much more detailed plan, and that, of course, is then an opportunity for us to say, well, that's great. I love your plans. You're definitely setting out on the right path, but why don't you have an SBTI target? Why haven't you aligned yourself with a 1.5 degree commitment? What more can you do? So those conversations are happening, maybe not quite on a daily basis, but pretty close to it. And often bondholders are the only source of public capital, right? So those issuers are very keen to hear what fixed income investors perceive as best practice within the market, whether that's from a private entity or some of the larger listed entities. They want to know what we're seeing. They want us to help them, to help themselves, improve their market perception as a sustainable leader.
So you mean James Carville quote might end up being true? That he wanted to come back as this is 1992, Bill Clinton's campaign director. Yes. When he came back from debt, he wanted to come back as the bond market because everyone was afraid of him.
Definitely.
Bertrand, this is a revolution, isn't it? Is this your experience too? Is this what's happening at CDPQ?
Yes, we do take all ESG factors into consideration in all investment decisions. We're also very active in the private debt market. And in that context, we do quite a bit of engagement with corporates to try to get them to improve their practices on all ESG issues, obviously including climate, but not only that. With regards to fixed income, I said that we have noticed, to listed bonds, we have noticed a shift in the debate with the banks, and this is good. The banks are taking these aspects much more seriously, and they are the ones that are structuring and selling that paper when the paper is issued. And so they have a key role to play with regards to having the proper dialogue with their client. And as an investor, we invest in that. We also invested across the capital structure, in debt and equity. So we use that as a leverage to engage with specific companies. Just to come back on the question of the equity and the power you have there, it is super important, and I can't stress it enough. I think there is a realization in the market that investors do have power, and I think that collective engagement is a very, very important tool. The reason why the vote on ExxonMobil was successful is that the investors were aligned and actually decided, okay, well, we're going to target these individuals and get them off the board. And that worked because there was sufficient momentum and sufficient alignment of investors. And I think this is key, because if we all have our view as to what to do, then nothing is going to get done because we're all going to vote in different ways. So super important to align views, to issue shareholders' proposals. CDPQ was behind the one that was submitted to the Berkshire Hathaway board, or shareholders, sorry. So very, very important to use all those tools and push the companies to do the right thing.
Lydia, you've been listening to this. I suspect this means you go back to the team and you say, now. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I just had a few comments on the issue of engagement, actually. We did a survey of our clients that invest in emerging market sovereign debt. And, we asked them what some of the challenges were in investing in these markets, particularly looking at ESG and climate change and things like that. And one of the things that came back was that the majority of people answering this survey said that they don't engage with sovereign DMOs as much as they would like to, and that they feel as though it's almost pointless doing it on an individual basis, exactly what we've just been hearing. And so it's that collective nature, actually, that would make things much more tangible and have a greater impact. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to be a little bit of a conduit and set up these sort of Chatham House rules, sovereign roundtables with different DMOs. So we kicked that off a number of months ago with Hungary, where we invited a number of our clients to come into the room and have a conversation with the DMO and actually just ask the really thorny questions, really get more information about their debut green bond, ask them, are you planning on doing anything in social, or, and asking them a lot about their nationally determined contributions as well. So there was a lot of the focus on climate change and the transition, and we're really hoping to continue to be that conduit, because I think for fixed income investors, as Kris was saying, there is a little bit of a perception that engagement isn't necessarily for us, but then take that into sovereign land and, it's really intensified. So that's something that we're hoping to try and improve as well, and to keep the flow of information going both ways.
It's really exciting, Lydia, that you're doing that. That's really, really good. I hope we get more gossip about that for the industry, apart from just going to your directly to your clients, because that, of course, is a signal. It's a critical signal for governments as well as corporates. Get your act together. Stop trying to fudge the issue and really deliver transition.
Absolutely. And one last thing, whilst I have everyone's attention, all of the think tanks and academic institutions and third-party providers out there that are looking at sovereign national determined contributions, NDCs, please keep up the good work. Please expand your coverage. And, as the new NDCs come out this year, we really want to see a data set out there that looks at whether or not these NDCs are sufficient or insufficient to get us to the Paris Agreement. I would love that data set to be, credible and with enough coverage that we can start to integrate that into the work that we're doing on the index side. So just a little bit of a kick up the bum, if I can, to keep working and work hard. And we'd love to see that data pretty soon.
I guess it's also an indicator, this whole conversation, of the extent to which this transition isn't going to happen by any sector just changing things. It's not going to happen with investors banging the table. It's not going to happen with banks. It's not going to happen with governments. It needs to be a collaboration. And we need to have a close working collaboration to be able to make this change. Hopefully a very productive one. I'm regularly saying to governments, you don't need to fund everything because investors will fund as long as it's bankable. And let's bring in the MDBs to make sure that it can be bankable and structure it accordingly. And then we can get a lot of funding out of it. But that requires the MDBs to be multi-party. And some of you will have heard Leslie Marsdorp from the New Development Bank, the BRICS Bank, yesterday, talking about the need to make MDBs greener to match the European Investment Bank and the EBRD's 50% climate commitment. They're up to 40% at NDB. They're trying to improve it, but other banks are a bit lower. So there's a lot to be done. The collaboration and cooperation is the key thing. I'm going to say that it's certainly, at least in the Western world, the asset owner drive is where it starts. Because as asset owners who are the top of the investor tree get active, ask, then fund managers like Fidelity are able to respond. They've actually get mandates to respond, and that flows on down to the JP Morgans. So Bertrand, you're in the hot seat here. And what I want to ask you about is advice, or what you would say to everyone who's listening about how to go forward on this issue as a leading asset owner and being acutely aware of the transitions argument, as well as the broader issue of mobilising capital for climate solutions. Give us a final parting reflection for our audience.
I would say the task is daunting. It is very complicated. It is complex to implement changes of that nature within an organization, but get started. Get started, learn, educate yourself, set targets. Targets are a great way to focus the mind. If they are net zero aligned, all the better. But if you don't want to go there because you're not comfortable, set targets anyways, and then get to net zero later once you're comfortable with using these tools to move your organization. The education is super important. Or use your power as a voice to say something. And I'd like to pick up on what Lydia said. NDCs are super important, yes, but we need governments also to set the stage at the macro level to put the right incentives. And I'll give you an example. In green power, governments set feed-in tariffs, etc., that were above the going power rate, and it's still the case for offshore wind. And what about procuring green cement, green steel, so that the companies that are prepared to produce green cement and green steels will have an incentive to actually come up with investment plans and a kit that they need to do, and then will be happily deploying capital to make this happen. But we need to go beyond just your targets to concrete actions on the ground to make things move at the industry level.
Great point, critical point. Kris, parting comments, advice for everyone out there about what they need to do, how they attack this problem, this challenge.
Yeah, great question. Bertrand's comment there about this being complex and complicated, I would absolutely echo that, and the importance of setting off down that pathway. I would stress, emphasize that it is a complex problem. It is incredibly challenging, and some of the simplistic solutions that we see in the market, in my opinion, don't cut it in terms of having a real world impact. So I think if you're looking to implement a sort of climate aware portfolio, then clearly you need to have a conversation with your asset manager around what that might look like, and whether or not what is important to you is to have an optically clean portfolio, or whether or not you're looking to really drive that sort of real world transition. I can't give each individual investor advice on what that should look like. That will be down to them and their own investment needs and requirements. But one thing I do believe very strongly is that you should be looking to asset managers should be delivering a return that is at least in line with what you can get elsewhere in the fixed income market. So in other words, just because you have an environmental mandate, you shouldn't be sacrificing return. You need to remain employed as well, right? So you've got to hit your investment objectives, which are both financial and environmental. So that is probably the parting thought that I would leave.
Good point. And the good news is that at least in the green and sustainable bond market, we are now seeing a premium pricing for green bonds and sustainable bonds as a secondary market, which means that they're actually ahead of other bonds in terms of their valuation level. So that makes life a damn sight easier. Admittedly, it's a modest margin, but it's at least a bit of a difference to cling on to. So things are changing. Lydia, you're now representing Jamie Dimon. You're the global sponsor for this conference.
Wow, I just got promoted a lot.
Get that American accent right. From JP Morgan's perspective, what would you be telling or offering as advice to our listeners, to all the participants in this conference at this point, after the discussion today?
Yeah, it's a super great question, and I think my panelists have covered a lot of it already. And it's like you said, no one can do this in isolation, right? So I guess I would have less advice and kind of more just impassioned pleas, for the corporates that are listening, like set those targets and then report on them and disclose as much as you possibly can, because we need that information to kind of create what we're going to create. And then to the data providers out there, like keep up the good work, keep coming up with new methodologies and new data points, and really critically think about how they can be done across sovereigns and across private markets and across emerging markets, actually. And then to our clients, our asset owners and asset managers, I would just say, for those of you who are considering doing a transition portfolio methodology, keep at it, keep trying to crack out how you can actually achieve that. I know it's very difficult and very technical, but as my panelists have said, even if it's difficult, keep trying and keep pushing us as well as index providers, because it's really that demand that will make us move and will make us actually spend our time on this problem as well. So the more people that are coming to us, banging on our door saying, hey guys, where's this climate transition benchmark? We need it yesterday. That's really the best thing that I can hope for, is that every conversation I have is around this topic, and the demand just keeps growing and growing. As I see it happening every day, I really just hope that continues, because that's what will really push us into action and the whole supply chain as well, so we can start to come up with new products to kind of address this problem.
Fantastic. Thank you. Jamie, that was really good. Thank you, Kris. Thank you, Bertrand. Thank you, Lydia. We have a huge job to do, but we've got some good advice here about how to take this forward. I'm often asked what's going on in China, because we do a lot of work in China. Are they changing, or are they just building more coal-fired power stations? And what I generally say is that, especially since President Xi Jinping's 30-60 announcement, peak emissions 2030 and then carbon neutrality by 2060, every ministry and department has got a committee looking at this, trying to figure out, how do we do this? What do we do? There is a sort of, it's a bit like London on Guy Fawkes night. There's fireworks everywhere across the whole plain, and certainly in China that's going on. Well, what you've shown me is the extent to which this is happening, of course, in all institutions, in the financial sector across the Western world. And your voice is being echoed around certainly all our partners, the banks, the investors, and all the consultancies in this area. We do have something special this year as a result of the 2030 targets, perhaps, as a result of the impact of climate change, or possibly as a result of showing that this is a market that can give sustainable returns as well as a sustainable future, to paraphrase Kris's statement. Whatever, things are changing. We need to change even faster, of course. We do have rather amazing challenge. In the green and sustainable bond market, we might get to 2 trillion this year. We might, if my wishes come true, get to 1 trillion of total issuance next year, which will help Kris and Bertrand their portfolios, and Lydia and indices. But folks, we need 5 to 7 trillion a year. Well, we need to be seeing an outstanding market of about 50 trillion to feel like we're making real progress in here, which is about half the bond market is what I'm going to suggest. A lot of sovereigns will have to be in that. So there's still a long way to go. It's important to note the solutions are there. We've heard again and again through this conference of solutions that are available now. But yes, the big change, the rapid changes we're talking about, we're not going to be able to do this and be able to give AA ratings for Kris to be able to invest in. There's a lot of these are going to come up as BB ratings, even in rich countries, unless we get support of one sort or another. And that's the role of the public sector. It might be development banks providing some form of uplift and credit rating. It might be governments setting policies that give greater certainty to investors going forward. There's a wide range of tools which we have used in non-green sectors for 200 years in the West to build the rich and wealthy society that we currently have. There's no rocket science here. We just haven't been applying them. We have some hope out of the US this year, where we've seen lots of talk about the rolling out of guarantee products by the government for green infrastructure. And we certainly heard John Morton speak yesterday, the Counselor to US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, about how the government is taking an opportunity approach with the Treasury taking leadership and then bringing investors behind it. That's the story for every country in the world, how we have to change. We know we have the capital. We've heard it today. We've seen it in the figures. We know that bond markets are bigger than ever. The futures exchange continues to suggest that rates will stay low. How lucky are we? At a time when we need to rebuild the world's economy, we have the capital available to rebuild the world's economy. We need to make a change. That's, of course, Lydia Harvey's job and a bank to try and make that change. But there are some jobs to be done. Investors, please listen to Kris, listen to Bertrand. Think about what you have to do. Think beyond ESG strategies that can be likened to shifting the deck chairs in the Titanic, and think to how you shift the Titanic, how you work together in the Net Zero Owners Asset Alliance or Climate Action 100 Plus or various other coalitions to make sure that the whole society can shift in a way that we can then find sustainable returns that will give us a sustainable future. That's a really important task here. It's not just shuffling our own portfolio. We can't do this alone as individual investors. We have to band together. For banks, it is about deals. It will take more work to create a market. It always does. We'll need to dig, and dig. We'll need to bring our structuring smarts to things that haven't been able to be invested before. Like the Sasol investments that look like they're coming through, to structure them so Fidelity and CDPQ can invest but also meet their regulated or their asset owner mandated returns they've got to meet. That's a structuring job. That's a banker's job. But whatever, we need a lot of deals. Of course, for development banks, we do need you to take a leadership role here, to pick up bits of risk selectively that will unleash torrents of capital into green investments. It's unlikely to happen unless you become activist. We have less than half a dozen banks that are activists globally. There are 500 development banks in the world, pools of public sector capital that are not focused on this particular area. We'll be announcing a partnership soon with BNDES in Brazil along these lines. That's one. The other 499 or 495 left need to act going forward. And then, of course, for policymakers, don't think that you're going to have to pay for this. The truth is, the climate change has started. We are beginning to experience the impacts, and we will experience them more and more. That is going to put constant stress on the balance sheets of governments. We're going to get a pandemic incident every few years. Hopefully not a pandemic, but that's what the IPCC Health Committee has predicted. Regular pandemics, but there'll be other crises, floods or fires. The public sector balance sheet is going to have to go towards emergencies, towards restitution, towards protecting our citizens to ensure that our economies and countries don't implode into Syrias or Somalias. So wherever we can, we need to ensure that private capital can be used and allocated, partnerships with private capital, institutional capital, partnerships with the financial actors that now manage our capital is absolutely necessary going forward. Think enabling policies, think certainty, think radical change, but do it in collaboration. That's the agenda, folks. There's a lot more to be done. We have to get to scale fast. We heard that about hydrogen earlier. The secret to change is to leapfrog to scale, not to try and do it slowly and incrementally. If we do that, we miss our deadline. What's our deadline? Well, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said that to have even a half-decent chance of a sustainable future for our children, we have to get global emissions down by 30%. The IEA's Net Zero report has shown what the implications are for energy. They are confronting. Hard decisions, folks, are now required about what we actually do and what we don't do, and of the stuff that we have to do, we need to shift fast. I think that's the opportunity. There is no doubt, in my view, that this is going to be the biggest stimulus in economic history of the planet. We are going to see some $90 trillion invested between now and 2050 in the transitions. We have a chance of making this into a long, equitable boom. We need to make sure that the fruits of that boom are shared around. According to the new climate economy, 70% of that capex has to be in emerging markets anyway. How do we create channels to emerging markets and capital shift? And we need to think about equality. In the session we had yesterday on green window geopolitical moves, we heard a big discussion about the risk of not addressing inequality. One of those risks is that societies fall over. There is a direct correlation between the collapse of societies in the face of a major shock, like an extreme typhoon, and inequality. The more equal they are, the more resilient they are. We can't afford collapsed societies. We are likely then to atomise. We are likely then to shift into Trumpian Americas rather than open Americas around the world. We're not going to get through this century, even at the very best trajectory, unless we can collaborate, unless we can cooperate, unless we can find ways to distribute the food from places in surplus to places in famine and make sure the shipping lanes stay open to move the food around. We can find ways to share the vaccines, folks. This is a struggle we're having right now. We can find ways to share the fruits of human endeavour of the last 200 years across humanity. If we don't, we're going to see a war. We're going to see a society we do not want our children to live in. Of course, we've got the capital. You've heard that. Remember that. We've got the proof. That's what the green and sustainable bond market, getting on to $2 trillion, not bad in a few short years, is proof of. We bring the deals, the money will flow. We just need to do it quickly, and we need to do it by 2030. That is fast. So next year, join me again as we celebrate what we hope will be a massive increase in this particular market and action and solutions by our partners that we heard today, by Kris at Fidelity, by Bertrand at CDPQ, by Lydia at JP Morgan, and all the other speakers we've had the privilege to hear. Extraordinary privilege, actually, during this week, with ideas, with solutions, with thoughts about how we take it forward. But above all, you're here because you care. You're here because you think this is a necessary part of our future. Godspeed. We need you to succeed, creating sustainable returns and a sustainable future. We can't have one without the other. Thanks for joining us at the Climate Bonds 2021 conference.